From what I've seen, I actually have a very unpopular rating for this book. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Faith and thank you so much for watching. It's officially April, so y'all already know it is time for my March reading wrap up. I read 6 books this month, which I think is pretty good, especially considering that for 10 days I took a road trip to Washington. For some reason, over the past couple months, I have been really struggling to find the motivation to read. Thankfully, I woke up on April 1st really wanting to read, and it's only April 3rd right now, but I'm really hoping that that sticks. Even without the motivation to read, 5 of these 6 books that I read this month were 4 stars or above. And the one that wasn't 4 stars, honestly, I do think was really affected by me having no motivation to read, but we'll get more into that later. As always, this video will contain spoilers, so I'll put timestamps in the description below of when I talk about each book. And without further ado, let's get into it. The first book I read this month was In Her Own League by Tomforde, and to no surprise, I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 stars. So, you know how I literally just said I had no motivation to read the past couple months? This is actually the biggest exception to that because I read the entire thing on release day. What can I say? I loved it. First of all, Emmett, I lift heavy for a reason, Montgomery. I knew I liked you for a reason. I loved this book and it definitely didn't disappoint. One thing I really liked about this book was that anytime a man was sexist to Reese, she immediately shut that down. But also the fact that Emmett knew she could hold her own, but he was always there to back her up anyways. I love them as a couple, and after knowing Monty for a few books, I'm really glad that he got his happy ending. However, I do have one complaint about this book. I've said this multiple times, but when I was reading Caught Up, I was waiting for Brian to get his ass beat. It didn't happen, but I hoped it would happen and play along. It didn't. So I hoped that it would happen in this book. It didn't. For those of you who don't remember, Brian is the guy who, in Caught Up, was talking to Miller, and then Miller said something, and then Brian was like, oh, yeah, well, you should feel bad because your dad gave up his entire life for you. Oh! No, sir. That's not the exact quote, but it was something along those lines. Guys, I just want to see him get put in his place so bad because I really don't like how he said that. And then Isaiah was there and was kind of like, dude, what the heck? But, like, other than that, it, like, never gets brought up again, really, and I don't like that. I need him to get his beat. But other than that scene not being in this book, I absolutely loved it. 5 stars, highly recommend. The next book I read was my book club's pick of the month, which was Across the Vanishing Sky by Cowles. From what I've seen, I actually have a very unpopular rating for this book. Now, it's not terrible. I'm giving it 3.75. However, I do think that was being generous. And I know they exist because it doesn't have a perfect 5-star on Goodreads, but I personally haven't seen anybody specifically giving it less than 5 stars. But before I talk about this book, I would like to say I very much think that this book was affected by my lack of motivation to read. So not anytime soon because I literally just read it, but sometime in the future I definitely will be rereading this when I actually do have motivation to read. But for now, it's getting a 3.75. I really liked Brayden and Dex. I thought that they were both very complex characters. There was definitely a lot of depth to both of them. I also really like mysteries, so it was fun getting to read a romance book with a mystery subplot. That being said, at times, it definitely was not enough romance, too much mystery. And yes, I literally just said I liked mysteries. However, if I'm reading a romance book, I do expect the romance to be the main plot. The first half of this book especially felt 100% like a mystery and not a romance at all. Yes, there were of course like, oh, he's cute, oh, she's cute. However, it's a romance. I do expect more than that. The majority of this book felt like it was a mystery with a romance subplot instead of a romance with a mystery subplot. So if you're watching this and you haven't read this, just know to expect a lot of mystery elements. Also, the first half of this book was incredibly slow. I did have a really hard time getting into it. That being said, overall, it was enjoyable, so I am glad that I finished it. Also, I read this while I was house sitting, so I was in this house by myself, and it was like 11 p.m., and I got to the part where the guy in a mask comes up on her deck and like looks directly into the camera, and I was terrified. Mind you, I love horror thriller, more so movies than books, but I still enjoy it. However, I do not enjoy it by myself at 11 p.m. in a house that is not mine. So I did get a little scared and decided that was enough reading for that day and put the book down and then watched some funny TikToks. Also, I did really like the side characters and I know who the next book is going to be about and I'm actually very intrigued for their story. So I definitely will be continuing the series at least through the next book. Again, I gave it 3.75 stars and honestly, I would recommend it as long as you're okay with a ton of mystery elements and some thriller elements mixed in with a romance. The next book I read was The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and I gave it 4 stars. I've talked about this multiple times, but in case you don't know, I have tried reading this twice before, and both times I DNF'd it, and this time I was actually able to make it through the whole thing. And you might be like, Faith, what changed during the 3rd read that actually was able to make you finish it this time? First of all, I listened to the audiobook of it, so that definitely helped. And the second thing that really helped was that I learned what it's actually about. And by that I mean, this book is very misrepresented in the book space. When I first got this book, people were putting it into categories saying it's similar to things like ACOTAR and other popular romanticises, however, it just has no spice. So obviously, I assume it's going to be a romantasy like those books, but it is not. Now I will say, apparently there is a debate on what romantasy actually means. However, I personally think that the majority of romantasy readers consider romantasy to be a fantasy romance. And a fantasy romance is a romance story that has fantasy elements. So for example, it's a romance story that takes place in a fantasy world. Like think ACOTAR. Yes, it focuses on the war with Hybern, but at its core, every single book in the series is a romance book. It just takes place in a fantasy setting. However, this book is not that. It is definitely a romantic fantasy. And a romantic fantasy is a fantasy book with romantic subplots. So for example, if in ACOTAR, the war with Hybern was the main story and Feyre and Rhys's relationship was just a side plot, that would be a romantic fantasy. There is a little tiny minuscule amount of romance in this book. It is literally like 97% fantasy, 3% romance. I was unaware of that the first 2 times that I read this book, so I thought I was getting one thing based on everything people had been saying about this book. However, this book is an entirely different thing. So this time, going in knowing that, hey, it is not a fantasy romance, it's more of a romantic fantasy, that really helped me actually have accurate expectations for the book. The majority of negative reviews I've seen about this book comes from the fact that people promote it as if it's a fantasy romance, grouping it with all these other fantasy romances, when it's not a fantasy romance. I love fantasy and have no problem reading a fantasy book with no romance. However, if I'm told that first and foremost this is a romance book and it's not, I will be, first of all, confused, and second of all, disappointed. But as for my thoughts about the actual plot and characters, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I really do not like Tairn. She is annoying and she pissed me off many times. I did really like that Cardan is low-key obsessed with Jude. However, Cardan having a tail? Disgusting. Didn't like that. Every time it was mentioned, immediately plucked it out of my brain. Did not happen, does not exist. And as for the plot, overall, really fun, except during the middle, it definitely kind of got slow and repetitive, and I did lose a little bit of interest. However, that picked back up towards the end. So again, I gave it 4 stars, and I would recommend, just know, it is not a fantasy romance, it is a romantic fantasy. And then we have an absolutely beautiful book, Project Hail Mary. Low-key think it goes without saying, this was a 5-star read. Incredible, beautiful, touching. I loved it. I cried so much at the end, because what? What was that? Never in my life did I think that I would be crying over a rock, but here we are. I love Rocky, and my dog is also named Rocky, so I love that. The movie did just come out, and I've seen a ton of people say that since they loved the movie, now they really want to read the book. And yes, if you love the movie, you absolutely should read the book. However, I do think that it is very important to note that the book contains significantly more science than the movie did. Faith, it's literally about a scientist going to space. How can it get more scientific than that? Listen. I know what it's about, okay? But in the book, he will be presented with a problem, and then we will see his entire scientific process, I'm talking down to equations and stuff, of him solving that problem. And that happens dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I've always loved science and sci-fi, so I didn't have a problem with that. I do just think that, especially if you're not super into reading sci-fi, it is just something that you should know before going in. Honestly, I cannot believe I'm about to do this, but I'm gonna defend Strat. I honestly didn't really like her until I sat down going over what I was gonna say about each book for this video. And the more I thought about her, the more I was like, y'all are hating For what? Don't get me wrong, yes, she is technically like a bad guy in the basic narrative of this story. She literally forced Grace onto that ship knowing that he would never be returning to Earth, so basically she was killing him. Yes, Grace didn't actually die, however that is completely besides the point because to her knowledge, none of the people on that ship were coming back to Earth, so she knew it was a suicide mission and she forced him onto that ship. So in that sense, yeah, she's the bad guy. But let's be real for a sec. She was saving the entire planet. 8 billion people plus the billions and billions of other living creatures and organisms on this planet. So she was faced with the trolley problem and she had to choose kill this one guy or kill 8 billion people, the billions of creatures and organisms on this planet, and that one guy. I personally think she made the right choice and I'm sick of seeing hate for her. Yes, throughout the story we get to know and we absolutely love Grace and she technically killed him, but like, guys, every living thing that exists versus him. I do think that at the end of the day she made the right choice. Don't get me wrong, I love Grace and I'm so sad for him because of what she did to him. However, I do understand why she did it and I think we should cut her some slack. But again, I just loved this book. It was beautiful. The movie was beautiful. And in case you're curious, I have a series where I compare books to their film or TV show adaptation. And I just did Project Hail Mary, so you guys should go check that out. But again, 5 stars. Highly recommend. The next book I read was an ARC copy of Cross Court by Denton, and I loved it. Easy 5-star read. And I will say it is available now, so you guys should definitely go read it if you haven't. I have never in my entire life related to a character as much as I relate to Nick. Like the only difference are physical appearance and she is a tennis icon. I am not. If you read it and you didn't like Nick, there's the door. I'm joking. Or am I? I am. I loved her so much and thankfully she won. I am sick of reading sports romances where the FMC is an athlete or is also an athlete along with the MMC and she loses. I'm tired of seeing it. I can count on one hand the amount of sports romances I've read where the man loses the championship game or the gold medal or whatever, which is great. If I'm reading a sports romance, it's nice that he's actually good at the sport. However, I absolutely hate that out of every sports romance I've read where she is also an athlete, most of the time, not all the time, but most, she loses. It drives me insane. Like, I'm so sick of it, and I cannot lie. This book was 5 stars. It was genuine perfection for me. I have not one single complaint about it. However, if she would have lost at the end, I would have given this book 2 stars. Again, that didn't happen, so we're all good. It is a 5 stars, but I am so sick of reading books where she has dedicated her entire life, just as much time as him, if not more, and he gets everything he's ever wanted, and she loses. I am so sick of it. I'm going off on a tangent, and I need to stop. But authors, please start writing female main characters who play sports and actually succeed. Please. Nick was a phenomenal player. She won, as she should have. And Alex, he treated her so well. Eventually, I will give you a list of my top 10 book boyfriends, and do not be surprised when he is on that list. I loved him so much, and I loved how it was her. That's it. That's like his entire life was just her. Like he literally didn't care about anything or anyone else, just her. And I loved it. If any of y'all know a man like Alex, please send him my way. Again, Cross Court is available now and I give it 5 stars and I highly recommend it. And the last book I read this month was an ARC of Fighting Chance by Mads Rafferty. I gave this one 4 stars and yes, I read the ARC, but it is also available now. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was really cute. I will say it is the 2nd book in a series and I'm pretty sure that they're considered interconnected standalones. However, honestly, I would not read them out of order. The emotional climax of Breaking Point is spoiled many times throughout Fighting Chance, and because of that, I definitely would recommend reading Breaking Point first. Obviously, you don't have to, but I would recommend it. Y'all know that my favorite trait in a man is when he is obsessed with her. Kieran was exactly that. He was obsessed with Layla. He yearned for her so hard. And it was amazing. But I do have a complaint about this book. I am the youngest person in my family, so honestly, I don't really know how kids act. Like, if you ask me the difference between a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old behavior-wise, I would literally have no idea. That being said, in this book, Emmy, Kieran's daughter, is 3 years old, and she definitely was acting like a 9 or 10-year-old, I think. Just definitely not a 3-year-old. Specifically for the last like 20-ish% of the book. You can maybe use the excuse of like, oh, she's been through a lot, so she matured faster, but she's 3. I feel like that's something you say about like a teenager. She's 3. Honestly, it's not a huge deal. Like I just said, anyone under 10 really just blends together in my eyes. However, anyone under 10 blends together in my eyes, and I could very clearly recognize that she wasn't acting like a 3-year-old. So if that's something that would bother you, just be aware of that. Again, it's really only like the last 20% when she starts talking. But honestly, I could be wrong. Maybe that is how 3-year-olds act. I don't think so. 3-year-olds can talk, I think. Yes, I know, because a whole point throughout the book was that she wasn't talking, and that was like concerning. So I guess they can talk, but I don't know like how many sentences they can form. Maybe she was acting like a 3-year-old, guys. I truly have no idea. If she was and I'm complaining about it, my bad. There were also a few times where it dragged or got a little bit repetitive, but other than that, I did really enjoy it and I thought that it was cute. I did like Breaking Point better, but honestly, I think that that kind of comes down to the fact that I just like the tropes that were in Breaking Point more than I like the tropes that were in Fighting Chance. But I did like both, and I do think the series is worth the read, especially if you like hockey romances. So again, I gave it 4 stars, and it's out now, and I would recommend it. And those are the 6 books that I read in April. Normally in my wrap-ups, I give you guys a physical TBR update, but I'm gonna be honest, guys, I cannot for the life of me remember what I started the month with, but I do know I ended it with 46 books on my physical TBR. I honestly think that only added like 1 or 2. Yes, I read 4 physical books. However, both of these arrived in March, so they kind of like cancel themselves out. And then these 2 were taken off of my physical TBR. However, I added these 3, so I'm pretty sure I started the month with 45 then and ended it with 46. Or maybe I'm forgetting another book that I bought, who knows. In a couple weeks, I will be doing a full physical TBR update, because in 2 weeks, 1 year ago, is when I first gave my official physical TBR count, and if I remember correctly, it was 67 books. So regardless, the numbers went down. But with that being said, I think that is all that I have for you guys today. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow my Instagram and my TikTok, which are in the description below for more bookish content. I hope you all had a great reading month. Love you guys. Bye!